I lived in a self-imposed silence, surrounded by walls that echoed a loneliness I myself had built. My apartment was spotless, my routine was predictable, and my heart was a locked room. I believed I had control, but in reality, I was a prisoner of a colorless life where days repeated themselves in shades of gray. I felt that something needed to change, that a crack needed to appear in that rigid structure. On a cloudy Saturday, a force I can't explain led me to an animal shelter. I wasn't looking for a companion, perhaps just a glimpse of messy, genuine life. The sound of barking and the smell of hope and disinfectant hit me like a wave. Young dogs jumped against the cages, begging for a chance, but my eyes were drawn to the quietest corner. There, lying on a worn blanket, was an old dog. His fur was a mix of white and caramel, and his eyes were two pools of melancholy and wisdom. He didn't bark, didn't jump, just watched me with a calmness that seemed ancient. There was a dignity in his quietness, an acceptance of his fate that left me breathless. He seemed to understand the world better than I did. The volunteer approached, her face marked by a weary compassion. "This is Bento," she said softly. "He's a sweetheart, but he's very old and sick. The vets haven't given him much time." Each word was a weight, a confirmation of what his eyes were already telling me. His story was about an approaching end, a final chapter written in solitude. As I looked at him, I didn't see a sick animal, but a mirror. I saw the same resignation, the same silent wait for the inevitable. The volunteer mentioned he had, at most, 30 days. My rational mind screamed for me to leave, not to invite that pain into my life. But something in that tired gaze held me, a silent connection that defied all logic. My brain went into defense mode, listing all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. The vet bills, the mess, the inevitable pain of loss in such a short time. It would be like signing a contract for suffering with a set date. I came looking for a spark of life, not to drown in an announced sadness. I tried to turn around, to force myself to look at the puppies, but I couldn't. The image of Bento, alone in his corner, was etched in my mind. Logic argued it was a masochistic act, an invitation to pain. Why bring home a goodbye? I could choose a young dog with years of joy ahead. However, the idea of leaving him there so that his last days would be in a cold cage seemed like a betrayal. It wasn't about me, I began to understand. It wasn't about what I would gain, but about what I could give. What kind of person would I be if I turned my back on someone in their moment of greatest need just to spare my own heart? The complexity of that decision paralyzed me. It was a dilemma that pitted my convenience against the dignity of another being. The volunteer noticed my hesitation. She didn't pressure me, just said, "Nobody wants to adopt a dog to say goodbye, but maybe he doesn't need a lifetime. Maybe he just needs a warm place for his last days, a place to be loved." Her simple words disarmed all my rational defenses, hitting the core of my humanity, forgotten for so long. Then, with a slightly trembling voice, I said the words that would change everything. "I'll take him home." In that instant, I felt fear and certainty colliding inside me. I didn't know how I would do this, how I would deal with the pain that would come, but I knew, with a frightening clarity, that abandoning that old dog would be a much greater and longer-lasting wound. The trip home was silent. Bento lay in the back seat, looking out the window with an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't joy nor fear, just passive observation. Upon arriving at my apartment, the place that before seemed orderly and clean suddenly seemed sterile and cold. His presence, even quiet, exposed the emptiness I tried so hard to ignore. The first few days were strange, as if we were two roommates who didn't know how to interact. I prepared a soft bed for him, the best food, fresh water. He accepted everything with a distant politeness. He didn't wag his tail, didn't seek affection. He just followed me with his eyes, studying my every move, as if expecting at any moment to be taken back to the shelter. I found myself questioning my decision at every turn. What was I doing? I had brought a dying stranger into my home. And now the silence was shared, which made it even heavier. I felt like a caretaker, not a friend. The connection I felt at the shelter seemed to have disappeared, replaced by a routine of medications and an anxious wait for something that wasn't happening. During the night, I heard him sigh in his sleep. They were deep sounds, loaded with a weariness that seemed to come from a lifetime of uncertainties. I stayed awake, thinking about all the homes he might have passed through, all the hands that touched him. His story was a blank book to me, and I felt I wouldn't have enough time to read even the first chapter. It was at the end of the third day that something changed. I was sitting on the couch, lost in my anxious thoughts, when I felt a wet, cold touch on my hand. I looked down and saw Bento, with his head in my lap, looking at me. His eyes were no longer distant. They were an invitation. He had finally decided that maybe, just maybe, this place was safe. That first touch was like the first rain after a long drought. It broke the tension that hung between us and opened a tiny door to trust. From that moment on, small changes began to happen, like a flower blooming in slow motion. He started waiting for me at the door when I left and resting his head on my feet while I worked on the computer. One morning, as I was preparing his breakfast, I heard a low sound, a hoarse, shy woof. I turned around and there he was, wagging his tail slowly, an almost imperceptible movement. That small display of joy was so powerful it filled my eyes with tears. It was proof that beneath that tired body there was still a spirit capable of feeling happiness and expressing it. These small victories became the center of my universe. A yawn that ended in a small groan of satisfaction, the way he stretched in the sun, the way he closed his eyes when I scratched behind his ears. Each of these moments was a gift, a lesson about valuing the now. I stopped counting the days that remained and started making each day count. I realized that Bento was teaching me to live. In his simplicity, he showed me that happiness wasn't in big events or achievements, but in the subtlest details of existence. The warmth of the sun, the comfort of a soft bed, the silent company of someone who cares. He was deconstructing my notions of success and introducing me to a much deeper form of peace. I started talking to him, not as you talk to a dog, but as you talk to an old friend. I told him about my day, my frustrations, and my dreams. He listened attentively, with his wise eyes fixed on me. And in his silence, I found more comfort and understanding than in any conversation I'd ever had. We were healing each other, and I hadn't even realized it. That wagging tail made me realize that my mission wasn't just to give Bento a comfortable place to die, but to give him reasons to live every second he had left. If time was our enemy, then we would make it our ally, filling every hour with as much life as possible. The idea came, suddenly clear and urgent. I would create a bucket list for him. It wasn't a list of radical adventures, but of simple pleasures he might never have had. Things every dog should experience. The first note was, eat a real hamburger with cheese. The second, feel the sand and smell of the sea. The third, sleep in the human's bed just for one night. And so the list grew, full of small luxuries and affections. We started the next day. I took him to a drive-through and ordered a simple cheeseburger. His eyes widened when he smelled it. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, getting his whole snout dirty. I laughed, a genuine laugh I hadn't given in years. Seeing him so happy with something so mundane made me question all the complicated things I sought to be happy. Each item on the list was a celebration. We had a picnic in the park where he napped on the grass under the afternoon sun. I took him to a pet shop and let him choose his own toy, a rubber duck that squeaked. He carried it everywhere with immense pride. I was rediscovering the world through his eyes, seeing beauty in things I had become blind to. The experience was transformative. That project, which started as a gift for Bento, became the greatest gift I had ever received. He pulled me out of my bubble of apathy and forced me to engage with life in an active and joyful way. We were creating memories, and I knew they would last much longer than the 30 days we had. The day at the beach was the most memorable. I expected him to run in the water, but Bento was old and weak. Instead, he simply sat on the sand, facing the sea, and stayed there for almost an hour. He breathed deeply, feeling the salty breeze, listening to the sound of the waves. He wasn't doing anything, but he was experiencing everything with an intensity that moved me. It was there, watching him, that I understood the deepest lesson he had to teach me. I had always lived either in the past, ruminating on regrets, or in the future, anxious about things that might never happen. Bento lived exclusively in the now. For him, the only time that existed was that moment, that smell, that sensation of sun on his fur. He was a master of the art of being present. I started applying this philosophy to my own life. During our slow walks around the neighborhood, I stopped looking at my phone and started noticing the flowers in the neighbor's garden, the pattern of clouds in the sky, a stranger's smile. I was learning to silence the noise of my mind and simply exist, to feel. Bento was my guide on this journey of rediscovery. Our routine became a ritual of small pleasures. Breakfast was no longer a rushed meal, but a moment of calm, where I shared a piece of bread with him. The night was no longer a prelude to insomnia, but a time to snuggle on the couch, listening to soft classical music. He transformed my house from a simple shelter into a true home. With each passing day, I felt immense gratitude for him, entering my life, for teaching me to love unconditionally and to find joy in simplicity. I had adopted a terminal dog thinking I was saving him. The truth, however, was that Bento, with his silent wisdom, was saving me. But I knew this peace was fragile. With the same subtlety with which life returned to his eyes, it began to fade away. The 25th day marked a change. The walks got shorter, the naps longer. The rubber duck was set aside. Reality, which I had managed to keep at bay with our bucket list, knocked on my door in a cold and relentless way. Time was running out. Visits to the vet became more frequent. The news was never good. It was a progressive failure, a slow and natural shutdown of his tired body. The vet praised me for giving him such a happy end of life, but his words were weak comfort against the pain growing in my chest. I was facing the dilemma of anyone who loves, the desire to fight against the inevitable. I found myself negotiating with the universe. Just one more week, I asked silently. Just one more good day. The internal conflict was torturous. On one hand, I wanted to keep him with me at any cost. On the other, the love I felt for him demanded that I not allow him to suffer. The most difficult decision was approaching, to let him go with dignity. He seemed to know. There was a new depth in his gaze, an even greater acceptance. In his moments of lucidity, he sought my physical contact more intensely, as if wanting to console me. He placed his paw on my arm while I cried softly, and I felt he was telling me it was okay, that it was part of the natural cycle of life. I started sleeping on the floor next to his bed, so he wouldn't feel alone during the night. I held his paw, feeling his breathing become increasingly shallow. They were long nights, filled with a mixture of deep love and overwhelming sadness. I was preparing myself to say goodbye to the friend who had reconfigured my soul. On the morning of the 30th day, Bento didn't want to get up. He looked at me in a way that I immediately knew. It was time. There was no panic in his eyes, just a deep and serene weariness. I called the vet, who agreed to come to our home. I wouldn't allow Bento's last moments to be in a cold, clinical environment. He would depart in his home. While we waited, I carefully picked him up and carried him near the window where the morning sun came in. I put his favorite classical music on to play softly. I didn't cry. I wanted my energy to be one of calm and gratitude, not despair. I whispered in his ear everything he meant to me, thanking him for each lesson, each moment. "You taught me to live, my friend," I said, my voice choked. "You showed me what true love is. You can rest now. You've fulfilled your mission. I'll be okay." He gave one last long sigh and rested his head on my chest. I felt his body relax completely. He trusted me until the end. When the vet arrived, he was incredibly kind. He explained each step of the procedure, ensuring that Bento wouldn't feel any pain. I kept him in my arms the whole time, stroking his head and repeating how much I loved him. His passing was peaceful, like falling asleep. One last soft sigh, and he was gone, leaving behind a deafening silence. I held his warm body for a while longer, the quietness of the apartment now permanent. The pain was immense, an open wound in my chest. But beneath the pain, there was also a strange sense of peace. It wasn't a tragic ending, but an honest and dignified conclusion to a life that in its last 30 days had more love and meaning than many entire lifetimes. In the days that followed, Bento's absence was a physical presence. The empty water bowl, the silent rubber duck in the corner, the empty space beside me on the couch. Grief was a process, a wave that came and went, but the sadness was different from that empty loneliness I felt before. Now, my pain had a purpose. It was the price of true love, and I would pay it 1,000 times over. The story of how I adopted a terminal dog and his last 30 days changed my life forever became my mantra. Bento left me an invaluable legacy. He taught me about empathy, about the beauty of impermanence, and about the courage to open your heart, even knowing it can break. He broke down my walls and planted a garden in place of my prison. I didn't go back to who I was. The change was permanent. I started doing volunteer work at the same shelter where I found him, helping other elderly and sick dogs find a home for their last days. I tell Bento's story to every person who hesitates, explaining that the time we have doesn't matter as much as what we do with it. The apartment is no longer silent. There's music, there's laughter, and occasionally there's the sound of paws of a new elderly friend who needs a warm place to rest. Each one is different, but they all remind me of Bento's lesson. Love isn't about possessing, but about giving. It's about making someone's journey a little lighter, even if for a short period. Bento's story is proof that the deepest and most transformative connections can emerge in the most unexpected places and last as long as it takes to change everything. He was my teacher, my friend, my savior. And if you feel an emptiness in your life, maybe the answer isn't in seeking something forever, but in offering your now to someone who needs it. If Bento's story touched you, share it, and consider visiting a shelter. You might not find what you expect, but you'll find exactly what you need.